2, Andy Butler, the District 117 Chief Judge.
All right, thank you, Rich. Can you see me okay? Yep. All right. Let's see. Share my screen. Having an issue sharing my screen.
Before we get too far, I did forget to mention, do you have any problem with having your session recorded?
No, not at all. Let's try this.
Andy is not the co-host, so there's a button at the bottom. When you're the Zoom host, you can enable it for multiple participants. That's what we use here at the district. So Andy has full control. Andy, if you need to send the slide deck to Tom or me, just send it over and we can share for you if you're having issues. But
let me try a different browser. I think my corporation might be blocking on the corporate browser. Let's try.
Yeah, that's just a Zoom tip. Andy, go ahead and take your time getting set up. That's a Zoom tip for everyone. I do see that at club meetings where they try to make let me change the host and hey, I see myself on video. They change who the host is. You don't have to do that. Just at the very bottom where it says share screen, multiple participants sharing. All right, looks like you're good to go. Andy, back to you.
All right, thank you. Sorry for the delay. So again, to get a sense of how many people were at the last session how many people were not at the last session? Is there a way you can indicate? Okay, yep. So a few people. I'll go through a little bit of the setup, but I've cut out some of the slides, the introductory slides, and allowed more time to focus on some of the other things that have come up in contests recently. And
Andy, can you swap displays?
yes, yeah. There we go. Is that better?
Thank you.
Yes.
All right. Okay. All right. So judging versus evaluating. Judging is about scoring a contestant against objective measures and selecting a winner. And judge's purpose is to select the speaker who has given the best speech on that day. They don't need to evaluate in the sense that we do in our club meetings. Evaluators appraise different aspects of the speech and then give the speech giver feedback on how to improve the speech. But that's not the judge's purpose. They're there to select a winner. And the evaluator is there to give appraisal and advice. The judge's decisions are final and they're confidential as well. So they don't give that feedback other than the final results, through the final results announced by the contest chair. So some of the barriers to objectivity that a judge might face: the speaker position. So when people are presented with a list or series, they often recall the end of the list first, and this happens in contests where the scores get better and better as the judge gets into the contest and into the process. And it can happen that the judge gets locked into last is best mentality. So what we'd like to do is compensate for this effect by paying close attention to every contestant and coming up with your own scheme. There's some different schemes that people have come up with for their own personal way to compensate for this speaker position. Another thing is the champion for the underdog. We tend as Americans to believe that underdogs put forth more effort than an advantaged or more powerful opponent, and thus more deserving of access. And judges should only use the criteria on the judge's guide and ballot to select the winners, not any sense of, wow, this person has really made great improvements if I've heard this person in another contest or in speeches in club meetings. You're not supposed to use that mentality of improvement, only judging the speech before you. The halo. So this is an inclination to admire all of a person's actions, their work outside of the contest, their demeanor other than their speech, or other admirable qualities. You have to focus on how they're delivering the speech and the content of the speech. So you have to overcome that halo effect that you might have for admiration for a particular contestant. And the reverse can also happen. If you have an unconscious tendency to disapprove of a person's actions or not admire certain qualities about that person, you need to overcome those temptations and focus on, again, the criteria. Related to the underdog effect, it's common for you to see the same contestant compete at different contest levels, and you can't compare their speech delivery at that point to speech delivery previously and give them extra points in your mind for having improved. You have to compare them for what they're delivering that day to the other contestants, and only the other contestants during that particular contest. Not the norm. So this is a false consensus where an individual believes that the majority of others share their own opinion regardless of what that opinion is. For example, it's in some geographic areas, it might be typical for contestants to stand behind a lectern. In our case, it isn't the case. People usually stand out in the speaking floor, in a speaking area. But if someone were to deliver a speech out of the norm for your geographic area or your group of people, you still have to focus on the criteria at hand and not on other factors out of the norm that might just be a different way of doing things. We can't be afraid of a different delivery. And finally, we definitely don't want prejudices and personal preferences interfering with our objective processes. Those prejudices and personal preferences are subjective. We need to leave those at the door and focus on the criteria. So, know the rules. Prevent misconceptions. As a chief judge, it is important that you have a copy of the rule book with you, printed out, or online. You can do your electronic copies, but during the before and during and after the contest, have that rule book, have read it at least once in detailed fashion, because sprinkled throughout the rule book are different aspects that affect how the chief judge and the judges operate. And it's important to know all of these different situations that are described in different places throughout the rule book. So know your rules to prevent those misconceptions and the local lore about local rules. And I have seen other districts post helpful documentation about rules and the chief judge's rules and how protests are handled. And sometimes those helpful documents include local lore or situations that they've run into that unfortunately they've made up rules. We have to avoid that local lore and stick to the rule book. And if there's any question about interpretation, find out ahead of time from Toastmaster International. And we did that recently. We followed up with a question about how protests are handled and got clarification from Toastmasters International. So don't be afraid to ask those questions, either from a higher body in the district or from Toastmasters International. Either one, we can find the right answer for you. All right, I will not go into great detail about the ballot, but this is the ballot. It's divided into 3 sections on content, delivery, and language. And the sections are denoted by the vertical section headers here. And there are some scoring recommendations, if you will, that you can use to score the contestants, which you would fill out in these vertical grids here. And each judge is instructed on how to fill this out before the contest in the judge's briefing. So during the contest, when a speech is being given, take notes. Use your paper to take notes about the contestant to remind yourself at the end of all the speeches, particular things about that contestant's content, delivery, and language that will help you score at that point. So use the suggested points is one way to do it, that a lot of people use the suggested points on the grid. There are other ways that you can come to the same thing with other point values. You can come up with your own scheme as long as it is a fair and equitable, objective assessment. Some people use pluses and minuses and add them up at the end. That's a different way to do that, instead of using point values. So content, delivery, and language being the 3 sections. Development. Development is, did the speech have a clearly defined opening, body, and conclusion? Were the speaker's ideas presented in an easy to follow logical sequence? Did the speaker use effective transitions? Was the speech purpose clear? For effectiveness, audience reactions. Was it effective in evoking audience emotion or reaction? Was the subject relevant to the audience? Was it presented clearly? Speech purpose, was it appropriate, entertaining, informing, persuading, or inspiring? Did the speaker achieve the purpose of the speech and the value of the speech? Did the speaker have substantive, logical, clearly defined message? Were the speaker's thoughts original? Was the speech in good taste? All of these things contribute to content. Delivery, physical appearance of the speaker, the body language, was it appropriate and purposeful? Did they make good use of the speaking area? And this is where you're allowed to deduct points for going out of a speaking area. Going out of a speaking area isn't a disqualification. It's something to be judged at this point in the physical point value area. Voice, flexibility, volume, modulation, showing emotion through your voice, enunciation. And the manner. Was the manner of the speaker confident, enthusiastic? Did they show concern for the audience? Language appropriateness. Does the word choice of the speaker fit the speech? Does it fit the audience and the occasion? Does it promote understanding of the message, or does it make it complicated to understand the speech? And correctness. Language correctness includes grammar, pronunciation, word selection. All right. I've added some sections here as opposed to the last training and taken out other sections to make room for this to talk more about some of the mechanics. And some of these have come up during the area contests, and we'd like to go over some of this. So prior to the contest, as the contest is being set up, one of the important things to remember is the contest chair selects the chief judge, but not any of the other judges. The chief judge selects the voting judges and the tie-breaking judge. The voting judges and the tie-breaking judge should only be known to the chief judge for as much as practicable. During times when we're giving in-person contests, eventually people will come to see in the audience that certain people have a particular type of paper that they're making notes on, and that they're giving their votes to the ballot counters. So it's inevitable that the anonymity is somewhat defeated there, but we don't want to try to announce the voting judges, and definitely not the tie-breaking judge. The tie-breaking judge should only be known to the chief judge. So that's an important part of setting up to make sure that the chief judge selects those judges. Now, what happens if there's a protest? Protest can happen and let me go to this one. The protest can happen for three things: eligibility, originality, and reference to another contestant or a contestant's speech. Those are the three things that a protest can be lodged for. Now, who can protest? The chief judge and the contest chair should not accept protests from the audience members. The only people who can lodge an official protest are, sorry, this is actually, I need to correct this. It is particularly just the voting judges and the contestants. So I need to remove chief judge from there. So voting judges and contestants can lodge protests. Once a protest is received, and that can be either to the contest chair or the chief judge, and if so, the contest chair notifies the chief judge that there's a protest. The chief judge will gather the voting judges, but not the tie-breaking judge. The tie-breaking judge is to remain anonymous and does not participate in the protest discussion. The chief judge and the voting judges discuss the protest. They take a vote on whether to proceed with the protest. If it is, they believe that there is some validity to the protest. At that point, they ask for the contestant in question that the protest was lodged against their particular speech or their eligibility, and for the contestant to defend their the originality. I'm sorry. Let's get back. Got into a bit of a loop here. It wouldn't let me go backwards. Sorry. All right.
Nice car, though.
Yeah, saw that in England. The discussions are around originality and reference to another contestant's speech. The contestant is invited to discuss and defend themselves on those points with the chief judge and the voting judges. Once the contestant has made that defense, then they're asked to leave and go back to their seat. And the chief judge and voting judge, who are having this discussion in a private area, then make their final decision, final vote. By majority vote, they come to a decision and inform the contest chair if there is a disqualification or not. That decision needs to be made, of course, prior to the announcing of the results, and the contestant, if disqualified, needs to be informed of the disqualification before the adjournment of the meeting. Are there any questions about the protest process at this point?
There is a question in the chat. It's not about the protests, but there is a question about the protests that just showed up, but there's also another question in the chat. So I don't know if you want to address that question later. If you can't see it,
see the chat.
The protest questions, do you announce protest disqualifications like time disqualifications?
I don't have the answer to that handy, but it is in the rule book. Let's see. Does anyone know off the top of their head about time? Prior to, I'm reading from the book, prior to announcing results, the contest chair must announce if time disqualifications occurred, but not name the contestant involved. And that's from the rule book specifically. So prior to announcing the results, the contest chair makes the announcement but not naming the contestant.
Okay, I hope that answers. Next question is confirmation that reference to another contestant's speech is grounds for disqualification. And I think that's something that's new, particularly for the virtual contests. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, it's one of the changes that they made most recently to the rule book. It is a third grounds for disqualification, and it's in. I'm reading it from the rule book now. Before a contestant can be disqualified on the basis of originality or for referencing another contestant's speech, the contestant must be given an opportunity to respond to the voting judges.
And then there's a question for online contests. How do judges report a protest? What methods should they use?
Right. So it is a bit difficult for the contestant side, and we might need to think about how we offer channels that offer a little bit more privacy for contestant to contest chair communication. But certainly the chief judge needs to set up other channels of communication between the chief judge and the voting judges, and the chief judge and the tie-breaking judge, which should be a different communication channel, because the voting judges shouldn't know who the tie-breaking judge is. You would set that up before the contest and make sure you have either their text numbers for their phone numbers to text back and forth in a group chat, or have some other mechanism through private chats to make that happen. But they would have to communicate. The contestant needs to communicate either with the chief judge or the contest chair.
If I may add on to that, because I was involved in a protest that was filed by a judge, and the protesting judge apparently discussed the matter with the chief judge directly, and then the remaining judges were invited to the ballot counter room without the ballot counters present for the discussion.
So that's how they kind of went off into a break room as a private room?
Yes, that was how that particular protest was handled.
Right, a breakout room. Okay. Yeah, it's good for the Zoom master, the contest chair, and the chief judge to think through these scenarios about how will we handle a protest before that happens, so that when it happens, you follow the rules, you follow your process, and you're not scrambling to figure it out.
And Ramona has made a remark which reminds me, and I think this is in the rules, that if it's a judge's protest, the protesting judge writes protest on their ballot. So that's going to be automatic. That doesn't address a complaint from another contestant. So
Right.
Your point about setting up procedures there is probably still valid, but for judges' protests, that is addressed specifically in the rules, I believe.
Right. Yeah. And how do we need to work out how we get the official documentation in an electronic format? Does anyone have how they handled that in recent contests about fulfilling that? Did they have electronic forms that they used, or did they just type out the results in a text chat?
Are you referring to the protest decisions or just the judges?
Just the ballot counting. How did that happen in online?
My experience has been that the ballots have generally been submitted by text or email, just taking a picture with your camera and then text them to the chief judge. Some chief judges also had a group text that included the ballot counters so that the ballot counters got the copies directly. Believe others forwarded the text to the ballot counters.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm not sure whether it was through private chat or a separate text or what, that the chief judge communicated with the contest master the results.
Right.
But if anybody else has any other experiences, feel free to chime in.
Right. Okay, let's spend some time going through some scenarios that TI has for us. All right. Opening it up to the audience, what are the reasons for which a contestant may be disqualified? Kind of a quick quiz question to start off with. And if someone could read out the chat, for some reason I can't see how to engage the chat. While
Andy,
I'm
your
sharing.
chat is at the very, very top. Look at the little buttons. It might be flashing right now.
Let me switch to, okay, I've got, yep, I can see.
See it flashing? Yep.
Yeah, on my corporate one, I can't see the chat, but I can see it on my other one. Okay. Right, eligibility. The timing disqualification is a different type of disqualification. That is not one for the judges to decide, but for the timer. And that is an important thing that I didn't mention, is that the judges should not consider timing in their evaluation. That's left up to the timer for the disqualification there to report the time. Failing to cite sources, it's a good one. That goes back to originality. And I believe the rule book says up to 25% can be referring to non-original content. So you should cite your sources and also not make it more than 25% unoriginal. All right, thank you for those answers. Let's see here. All right, what happens in this scenario? We have 4 judges sign and print their names on the ballots. And if you've heard this question, the last one, let the people that haven't heard this question give some answers. But if you have 4 judges who sign and print their names on their ballots, you have 1 judge that only prints her name on her ballot but does not sign it. 6th judge neither signs nor prints his name on his ballot. And the 7th judge only signs her name on her ballot. So we have 4 that sign and print names one that prints, one that does neither, and one that signs the name on the ballot.
Andy, are we supposed to be seeing a slide with the
No,
text?
it's just a question. This is kind of more of a discussion part of the topic, because the answers are right here, but we have how many judges' ballots would be counted? We have guesses about how many of the 7 ballots would be counted. Ken says 4. Janine says 5. 5 and 4. I believe this one we discovered last time that I'm not correct, that you both have to sign and print your name. Was that what we found, Ramona? So the answer would be
Correct.
4. So only the ones that signed and printed their name should be counted. So the other 3 where they only printed their name, or they neither signed nor printed, or they only signed their name, those would not be counted. Sign and print your name on the ballots to be counted as valid. And what happens, another question, what happens if a judge leaves the 3rd place winner's name blank and there happen to be at least 3 speakers in the contest that ended up giving qualified speeches? But if they leave the 3rd place winner's name blank, does that ballot get counted for the first 2, or is the ballot eliminated? Yep. Tossed out. That's correct. That ballot would be tossed out because you have to fill out all 3 first, second, and 3rd place winners in the ballot.
There's an associated question is regarding the electronic signature, if that gets treated as a valid signature.
Yes. Yes, there is some, I believe it's in the good practices for online contests. They talk about that, and the electronic signatures are to be treated as valid and agreed ahead of time, the method of that electronic signature. And it does kind of vary if you're using PDFs, what that electronic signature shows up for different people, but it is to be treated as a valid signature. Ken has a question about how or when in the process the validation of the ballots takes place sequentially. So in terms of, Ken, and you're talking about in terms of the contest, when does that ballot validation happen? Yeah, in the ballot counter room. So when they, in an online format, as those ballots are received by the ballot counter, and in the physical format in person in the ballot counter's room, ballot counter is validating those, and then would report back to the chief judge if there were any improper ballots. Sorry. All right. Okay. All right. So what happens if an audience member approaches a contest official and asks to see the points awarded to the particular contestants to make sure that the counting was valid? Shouldn't that audience member have a right to see that the contest was conducted in an official manner? Oh, I think the answers are unanimous. No, no, never, not allowed. The ballots are confidential. The only people who should be seeing the ballots are the voting judge who filled the ballot out, and the ballot counters in the ballot room, and the judge, if chief judge, if there's a question from the ballot counters, they're reporting back to the chief judge. Those are the only people who should see the ballots. Those are the only people who should see the points themselves are not even relayed to the ballot counters, just the positions, first, second, and third. The points that an individual voting judge makes on their form stays with that top half of the form, stays with the voting judge. And they're not supposed to turn that in. They're supposed to destroy that after the contest and make sure that no one gets a hold of that. So it is a private and confidential thing. All right. What would happen in the following situation? The contest results are announced. First, second, and third people are announced. The contest meeting is adjourned. After this, an individual audience member complains to the chief judge, appropriate person to complain to, complains that the judging was unfair. There was something noticed by the audience member that would be a protestable thing. Let's say they noticed that the speech wasn't original. The audience member makes the complaint that the judging was unfair. To whom does that chief judge report that? Does the chief judge need to reconvene the voting judges for a protest in that situation? Or does the judge need to notify the contest chair that something needs to be rectified? And what we have here are some good answers. William Tran has a good one. Protests must be communicated before the final announcement. And in this case, it's not valid because it's coming from an audience member. So the protests definitely should be communicated from a contestant or a voting judge before the announcements of the results. And audience members are not allowed to protest at any time. And another point is that if there was a mistake in the conduct of the protest committee, or they missed something, it doesn't matter. Once the announcement is made with the decisions, those decisions are final, and they don't reverse decisions at that point. That is the Toastmasters International rule is that all decisions are final from the time the results are announced. Take them to Starbucks and have a cup of Java. Tell them to learn the rules, Ken says. And it's a contest. It's not the end of the world. We're going to move on, and the decisions are final. All right. So let's discuss about originality. What is public domain in terms of originality of a speech? And how does it affect the speech originality? Let's say you're telling a joke, and that joke is not original to you. Is that an original joke? Is it public domain? Am I allowed to use it if it's public domain? the point around the public domain nomenclature is that there are a number of jokes and stories and anecdotes which have been around a long time. They appear in many places, been told many times by many people. Those are considered to be part of the public domain. And this is where it's important. Those public domain items, their sources cannot be cited in some cases. And if they're in the public domain, the sources well, they need to be cited that it comes from another source, that it's not their original joke. So it's important that even for public domain jokes, you have to make it clear that it is not your original joke, even if the exact source is unknown. You can simply say an unknown speaker or an unknown source told me the following joke. So it's important to cite your sources to make sure that the originality of the speech is clear. We have some good points here in the chat as they roll up there. All right, are there any questions from the audience that we didn't cover?
Okay, there's one.
I'm reading the one from Ruby. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
What if the tie-breaking judge doesn't sign and print name on their ballot, but there is a tie? Right. You would be in a predicament at that point. That might be one to take away to Toastmasters International, unless someone knows. Sandy Campbell, if you happen to know that one, I think the ballot would be not valid. And there would be a point of contention there. So it's very important that the tie-breaking judge fill out their ballot correctly. But it's one that we'll find out the answer to and get back to the group on that. Marcella, you have a question. In online speech contests, is there any type of disqualification to not being on video? That's another good question. I believe the implication there is that you should be on video, and you have to commit to being on video prior to the contest as part of the recording principles. If there's a problem with the video feed, so if a speech is interrupted, I do recall from the Toastmasters International guidelines that the timing of the pause in the technology problem is not to be counted against them, and that they can pick up the speech from where they left off when they were disconnected with no time penalty for the disconnected time. But as far as not being on video at all, I believe that they do have to commit to being on video in an online contest. If anyone knows differently, please raise your hand. I think that, yeah, because it would come into a question about the speaking area. You couldn't judge speaking area if they were not on video. I think the speaking area is defined for D117 as the area to be seen in the video. With video with poor quality, I don't think that that counts against you necessarily. That's part of the no penalty for technology problems. But it would help your case if you make sure that you have good video normally, that you have good equipment. But you can't be penalized if the internet is slow that day for your particular neighborhood. Yeah, good point from Susan there, that not to count video and audio quality. All right. Well, thank you for your time. Appreciate your good feedback and interaction. It's been good. I am taking notes on each time I deliver this and trying to improve the presentation and improve the quality of our training with the judges training. So I appreciate your feedback. If you have any questions or feedback for me, feel free to deliver it to me directly or through one of your district representatives that you do have email for. They will get that feedback to me. Are they disqualified if the video stops working and they are unable to get it to work? If they were unable to get it to work at all, I don't know that the guideline specifically talks about that particular thing. They may not be able to qualify if they can't at some point deliver the speech in its entirety. But there are, they do speak to whether or not there's a break in the speech due to technology, and it's not to be counted against them. But in any case, thank you for your feedback, and I'll hand it back to, is it Rich at this point?
Yes, yes. I'm just taking a note of that last question. And I don't know if you're going to follow up or if you would like me to follow up on these two more challenging questions.
I'll be happy to follow up if you can pass them to me in an email.
Okay.
And who is there? Someone taking the roster? I can get that, if they could get that roster for the attendees for today to me, I'd appreciate it, and I can track that in the judges training database.
Andy, what I'll do is I'll just save the chat if you want that for your questions, but also I can give you the report of who attended as well.
That would be awesome. Thank you, Ramona.
I'd like to just address Marcelo really quick. I know that you're on a time limit, Andy. Marcelo, I understand that happened at your last area contest. The contestant couldn't get back on video. So when you do the pre-contestant briefings, you need to brief contestants to have a backup system. I did see this at area last year and at division last year, and the individual had to get on her phone, and then we allowed her to come back into the contest, but she had to find, actually, I think it was her third backup, to be honest, or her third mode of how to get on video, and she was able to compete. So contestants should be briefed to have their second, maybe even third backup device, and that is in the contestants briefing for online contest.
Okay. And if you could stop your screen sharing, Andy.
Yep, sure.
And thank you for that very informative session. Sounds like there's still some open questions, but I hope that your remarks have clarified a lot of issues for some people. I know I have learned a few things that I may not necessarily have really thought about before. So I have a feeling that contests are always going to be a learning experience for everybody, because the human ability to come up with a new way of doing things wrong seems to be infinite. So you've really got to be prepared for that. I'm going to go back to my slides, back to my agenda for